Welcome back to the channel, guys. This is Laz with Home Link Tech. It's been a while since I've uploaded a video, but that was on purpose. I wanted to allow enough time so that I can gather all the information needed for this video. And in today's video, we're going to be talking about Field Nation, pros and cons, what my personal experience has been on the platform over the course of 4 months now. I have completed 100 work orders on the platform, so I feel confident in providing you with an in-depth review on Field Nation as a platform and a tool. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right into it. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the pros of Field Nation, right? When you think of Field Nation for a low voltage tech, it is a great way to accumulate the experience needed to be able to get to that 4 years of experience to be able to get a specific license that you may be looking for. So in that aspect, I think Field Nation is a great tool and you can utilize it to your advantage. Now, startup costs, right? If you're an upcoming company and you are new to the industry and you just don't have the funds to really get something big going right away, this is a great way to get your foot into the industry without actually having to invest a lot of money besides tools. So when you think about the things that you're going to need for low voltage, you can go ahead and make a list. In fact, I'll actually put up a starter kit in the description below. So if you are considering the industry, then you have an idea of what you would need in order to get started on Field Nation and get on your way of completing work orders. Another benefit that you get with Field Nation is that they offer a Field Nation Pro package. And basically what that does is for an additional 3.9% of your work order, that's the fee that they charge, they will allow you to have access to your money on a daily basis. What that means is if you've already completed work orders, right? And the buyer in this case would be the person who assigned the work order to you, has approved the work order, you don't have to wait to withdraw that money. Now, with that said, something to keep in mind is that Field Nation does have a maximum daily withdrawal of 2. So you can only do 2 withdrawals per day. Typically, what I would recommend is, and in my experience, what I have noticed is that most approvals happen within a window of 7 a.m. to about 2 p.m. So it is, again, take this with a grain of salt, but if you within that window by 2 p.m. you've noticed that, say, there's no other approvals, then it's safe to go ahead and cash out everything else that you have there. It's safe to assume that anything else that is pending approval is probably going to happen the following day. And again, this has just been my personal experience. This may vary depending on the buyer, so that's just something to keep in mind. If you are very detailed with your work and you follow the scope of work to the letter and you deliver on all of the deliverables, they'll keep you in their contact or their network in this case, and they will typically route work orders to you before you even request them or even see them on the platform. That's one of the perks you get with making sure that you're providing quality work. With that said, as you start to gain the experience and you start to gain the reviews and you start to gain the score on Field Nation, which is essentially your technician score that shows your timeliness, it shows your rejection of work orders, your completion, and then buyer satisfaction. All of those things combined is going to give you a score. Once you've done that and once you've gained the experience in your catalog that's going to show to the buyer that you have experience in that field that they're looking for, you then have a little bit of leverage to be able to counter on these work orders, right? Let's say if someone posts a work order at $30 an hour with a maximum of 4 hours, then you can go in there and counter offer it at 40 or 50 bucks an hour. And if it's within that buyer's budget to approve it, and they see that you have an excellent score, they're most likely going to approve it because they want to ensure they're sending someone out who's going to deliver on all the deliverables and it's going to provide them with excellent workmanship. Another great thing about Field Nation is all of the connections that you make in Field Nation, right? When you get assigned to a work order, sometimes they'll assign you with another technician who's possibly an engineer in his field, or has experience with the platform, or has experience with the buyer, that networking is going to allow you to navigate through the Field Nation system effectively and adapt to their system quickly. Now, talking about Field Nation, we've already touched on a lot of the perks that Field Nation offers. Let's talk a little bit about the negatives. My experience with Field Nation has been a rough one. And I, let me backtrack here. The platform gave me a lot of work in the beginning, and immediately started gaining the traction I was looking for. And it gave me this sense of satisfaction that I have chosen the right field, right? And I love what I do, and I definitely see me doing this for the foreseeable future. So uh, don't take that the wrong way. That it's not that I'm complaining about the line of work I'm in, but Field Nation, and you will see this consistently online if you do your research. Field Nation is about the buyers. They will always side with the buyers. No matter what they tell you, no matter what you see, no matter who you talk to on that side, no matter who you chat with, they will always tell you we maintain a 50-50 buyer, 50% technician. Not true. They will always side with the buyer. Now, what happens if you get into a situation where the buyer doesn't want to pay? I've been there. My documentation is always on point. I always make sure to document every conversation I have, every text message I have with the buyer, everything, the scope of work. I always make sure to thoroughly review the scope of work to ensure that I do not leave a minute opportunity for anything to be disputed. Not only that, but my reputation is on the line. So that's the reason why I am very detailed when it comes to those things. I'm not a very organized person, so by no means am I saying that. And those of you who have worked with me, like hands-on worked with me on our side of the company, know this. But I am all about my client. I always make sure that my client gets the white glove treatment. I always make sure that before I leave a job site, every single request has been fulfilled on my end. Well, in this scenario, I had a situation where we took on a job with a client who, or a buyer in this case, who we had established a really good relationship. I had done a lot of quality work with them. Even their lead engineer was extremely happy and loved working with me because he knew the level of commitment that I would give when I was out on the field. I would always ensure that my quality of work was always A1. Well, we were already butting heads a little bit prior to this instance, right? And it was because the buyer was constantly underpaying me for jobs. Now, I understood that before I can get to a point where I can demand more, I needed to provide more. I needed to show them that I was worth what I was going to be asking for down the road. And it got to a point where I said, okay, I'm no longer taking losses because, again, I am a business owner and I have a business to run, and I have to be profitable, or else I'm not doing myself justice, and or my partner in this case. So my partner and I completed a job for them that was under some very harsh conditions. We knew the job was underpaying, but we took it anyways because, again, it was a part of our way to show them the level of work that we can commit to in order to then have a sit down with them and simply ask them for what we were worth, that we know would still leave meat on the bone for them. And again, it was no hard feelings, right? We were very clear about it. Hey, listen, if you can't pay us that amount, we completely understand. You can find someone else that would do the job, and if in the future there's anything else that we may be able to assist with or partner up on projects, we'll be more than happy to do so. Well, we do this job for the client. Day one, we get there, all of the materials or the lift were not on site. We then have to drive another 2.5 hours back because it took us 2.5 hours to get there. So we're 5 hours in drive time alone on day one. Buyer did not even apologize, just simply blamed, well, let me not say the buyer, but their lead engineer blamed the buyer, the owner of that company, saying that he wasn't the one who had coordinated that job. And I actually believe him because I had done other jobs with that lead engineer, and that gentleman was very detailed. In fact, I learned so much in the time that I worked with him. But neither here nor there. The buck stops with whoever I'm dealing with. There should never be any blame going around. If I hire someone to do a job and I or my company failed to execute on our commitment, I take the blame and I'll make sure that I do right by the technician or the client, in whichever case it might be. With that said, we do the job. We get there. Finally, day two, which was probably 2 weeks after materials get there. The lift is there. We get to doing an inventory and start to look at where we're gonna start. What are we gonna attack first? Turns out there were still materials missing. We completed everything we could that day. It took us roughly around 9 to 10 hours to complete that job. In fact, we actually ended up closing down the location for the client because um, you know, we were way past their normal hours of operation. So we ended up closing down the location for the client. My partner actually even got stuck on the lift that they had ordered because the lift had some sort of mechanical issues, but that's neither here nor there. Long story short, I leave them. I give the buyer a list of little things that needed to be completed, and I had committed to coming back out to ensure that that job was completely done. Mind you, I didn't even break even on this job. I actually ended up losing money on this job. But that's not their fault. That's mine. I was the one that accepted it. I was the one that agreed to the terms and conditions of that job. Fast forward, client wants us to do another job for them, 22 camera install at $1,300. Extremely underpaid. Anyone who's in the industry is gonna know this. But we had to rip out old equipment, rerun new Cat 6 cables, rip out the old equipment that was there for the NVR, the monitor, relocate everything into a different room with the new equipment. And the buyer only wanted to pay us $59 a camera. Um, Look, I am not prideful. I will accept work when I need it, and if I feel that that would have been worth the kind of work that I was going to deliver on, I would have accepted it. But it was a little bit insulting to me that they they had offered us that after seeing what we had previously done for them and the level of work we had committed to. Long story short, we get outside, and I had already informed their dispatch that I would not be accepting that work order until I did that walkthrough. To be fair, um, to the buyer, I completely understand their point of view that we had a disagreement on site and the work wasn't completed. They felt that that wasn't the place for a disagreement to happen. They basically felt we should have did the job regardless, even though I had made it clear to them that I would not be taking the job until I did that walkthrough. Long story short, the owner of the company is very upset, visibly upset with us. We hand them back all the materials that we had gotten. The buyer then decides not to pay us for the previous job. Didn't dispute the work. They just outright didn't pay us. They were already 22 days past due on the invoice in Field Nation, when they initially had an approval time frame of, I think it was 12 days is what they usually had. Well, time is passing after we had, turned them down on that job. We figured we weren't going to get any more work from them, as they were pretty upset because they didn't have anyone else that was crazy enough to accept a job of 22 cameras at $59 a camera. It's ridiculous. Anyways, not to go on a rant here, but I then decided to dispute an approval needed. So you can actually do a report an issue. And I go on Field Nation, I report the issue of approval assistant needed. Okay, I do that. I decide, okay, I'm more likely going to have to wait about 7 days before I get a resolution. I speak with someone via chat. The person tells me, hey, we have attempted to contact the buyer. We will keep you posted. Buyer has to respond by this time, or else within 12 days, we're going to auto approve this invoice. Awesome. I said, okay, we'll get our money. It just took a little bit longer than expected, but okay. Field Nation has got our back. 7 days pass. I don't hear from anyone. I then reach back out again to Field Nation, explain the situation over and over again because it seemed like every time you call, there's no notes that are being really being taken, and I had to explain the situation to that technician. That technician proceeds to apologize and that they're sorry we went through this experience. That's not the kind of environment they want to create for their technicians, and that don't worry, we're gonna come to a resolution for you. They then say, listen, we've attempted to contact the buyer. The buyer's not responding. We're going to go ahead and forward this to our resolution team. Rest assured that once the resolution team has this, they will either auto approve the order if the buyer does not respond, or they would find the best resolution that they can for the situation. Very vague. Well, after back and forth between the buyer, me, and the resolution team, it turns out that the resolution team is absolutely pointless. All they do is basically communicate what you say to them over to the buyer, then from the buyer to them, and then them to you. They're a middleman. After we finally provided all of the documentation, pictures, screenshots of conversations we had with the buyer, pictures of the job, work order scope completion, closeout notes, I mean, endless amount of evidence that would prove we did everything we needed to do to meet that client's scope of work for that work order. After all that, Field Nation basically said, look, what are you willing to pay? What are you willing to accept? We said, we're not willing to accept anything less than what we are owed. We fulfilled this work order to the T. I mean, I was very upset because one, we had already lost money on this job. We weren't making any money. And I was already upset that I had my business partner waiting on his cut for the work that he did. It wasn't like just because he's invested in the car. No, he actually went out with me, boots on, and we were both out in the field. In fact, he did the most because he was actually operating the lift. I don't operate lifts and I don't do well in heights. But long story short, Field Nation basically relays the message back over to the buyer and says, look, they're not willing to take anything less than what they're owed. The buyer says, we'll pay them $190. Mind you, the job should have been paid at $1,000, even though we all know that was underpaid, but whatever. It was an agreement we had with the buyer. We took it anyways. They wanted to pay us $190, right? Because their argument was there was 2 cables that were damaged, actually 3 cables that were damaged. And those 3 cables were damaged because the buyer provided an equipment that and I had this a part of my documentation. I had the screenshots that I explained to them. Listen, this equipment is not adequate for outdoor use. Whatever. We proceeded to use it because the buyer, that's what they sent us. That's what they wanted us to do. That's what we did. Anyways, long story short, buyer sends that. I counter offer with $400 because I just wanted to get this over with. We were already at the point of submitting a mechanical lien. We had sent out a notice to owner so that the buyer and the client would be made aware that the buyer did not want to pay us. And we were willing to take it to the extreme because it was the principle that we had put in the work. You owe us, pay us. That was it. Anyways, at the end of it, they ended up paying us $400. And what I want to say here is that regardless of what Field Nation tells you, regardless of who you chat with, they're going to tell you we are 50% buyer, 50% technician. We try to maintain a neutral state. That is not true. They will always side with the buyer, and they do not have anything in place to force a buyer to pay even when the buyer is in the wrong. Even when you have evidence that proves the buyer is wrong, they will not force that buyer to pay you. So just keep that in mind. I am definitely frustrated with Field Nation. I am at a point where I am really contemplating not using Field Nation anymore. I know there's other services out there. And I've looked at the other services, and I will be honest with you, Field Nation has the most polished when it comes to their platform, their load board. I say load board, but they're basically their board for work orders. They are the most polished, so I give Field Nation all the credit that is due. I think they have a great system. but it has its flaws. At the end of the day, that system would not exist if it wasn't for us, the technicians. Yes, I understand the buyer is a crucial part of their business model. Without the buyer, you can't fulfill the work orders for the technicians, but your technicians are your bread and butter. Your technicians are the ones that ultimately become buyers, right? When you have someone like me, my goal eventually was with Field Nation to become a buyer where I have service agreements with companies and I no longer have to go out and do these work orders. I can assign them to other technicians that are coming up in the industry. So with that said, that's been my experience so far with Field Nation. I hope that was useful for you. I hope for any of you new technicians that are getting into the industry, I hope that that helps in some kind of way. Yeah. Well, ladies and gentlemen, there you have it. That's my take on Field Nation. For anyone who's considering the platform to get started, I think it's definitely a good platform to get started on. But I will say is to be aware of what you're getting into. Understand the challenges that you will go through when using Field Nation as a platform. Another thing that I would probably suggest that I wish I would have known before I jumped into the industry was don't just rely on Field Nation as the only means of work. Be actively looking for service agreements. Push for service agreements. That is the most important thing you can do for your business. It is going to ensure that you have no idle time. And God knows I have gone through many idle times, on end, uh, weeks on end with no work. So very important that you just don't rely on Field Nation as your only means of jobs. Furthermore, don't only rely on one company or one buyer from Field Nation to provide you work, because you will find yourself in a situation similar to ours where if that buyer has been giving you consistent work, that you've neglected all of your other contacts that you have established during your time in Field Nation. You will find that when that buyer just up and decides to give you no more work, or you have some sort of disagreement with the buyer, or the buyer just decides to start shorting you on pay, or paying you less, or whatever the case may be, you can no longer go back to those other contacts you had, because now you got to start at the bottom again. You disappeared for them. You're no longer in their network. They've probably routed you 5, 7, 10, 15 work orders that you've declined because you were busy doing work for that other buyer. So very important that you don't get vested into just one buyer, and you treat every buyer with the same level of urgency. Also, buyers will sell you the moon, they will sell you a dream. Do not get 100% vested in it. Take everything the buyer tells you with a grain of salt. Take everything a contractor tells you with a grain of salt. It is not set in stone until it is done. So if someone tells you I have a major project coming up, I want you to be my lead guy on that, awesome. Let me know when that day starts, send over the details. Till then, I will continue working with all of my other clients. So it's just something to keep in mind, an experience that I have had in this journey, and it has probably been the most detrimental lesson I had to learn. Was that I got very invested into one buyer or into one contractor because they made promises that, let's be honest, in this industry, you're going to hear all sorts of promises. So with that, I'll leave you with that. If you have any questions, or if there's anything I can help with, drop it in the comments below, and I'll do my best to get to it and try to steer you in the right direction. Have a good one. Till the next one.